Originally, when you know, on the internet, when people sent files back and forth to each other, they got just big pages of text, and so that looked something like this. Well, that's not what I want. Where's that? Right? And so if you received a document on the internet, this is what you received. You know, you just received a bunch of text. And that's what gets sent from other computers to your computers, a bunch of text. And what Tim Berners-Lee did was he said we could create a markup language, and he created a markup language. You don't know this yet? Do you know this? Yeah. You already know HTML? I'm trying to teach this guy something that he doesn't know. He comes to class, he knows everything already. I feel bad for him. And so, you know, it's a markup language, meaning we're marking up the text with something else. And then we could have a piece of software interpret that and display it in a certain way. So again, we're talking about file types, and files are, you know, just storing data in a certain way that some piece of software can open and interpret and read and show you that, whether it's an image or a PDF or whatever. And so now here is another way that we could store some information in another piece of software. A browser, web browser, can open that and read it and interpret that. And so we have tags. He has tags like an H1, right? So this might be the introduction. And then we could create paragraphs, you know, in there. And so we might have one paragraph, you know, with this chunk of text. And then maybe another paragraph with this chunk of text, right? And so you can kind of see like, well, this isn't that difficult. H1, paragraphs, you know, and I'll just get that text and drop that in there. And then maybe we'll have another heading. And this heading here would be hypothesis. And then create another paragraph and put the rest of this text in that paragraph. And so now when you look at that, oops, I just launched Firefox. But that's what it looks like. It's like, oh, that's much easier to read. All right, much easier to read than this, correct? Like, isn't that sweet? And so then, you know, the browsers and the markup language evolved so that you could also start to do other stuff with it, like put images into it. And so if I wanted to put an image into it, I could go grab an image somewhere, and let me see if I could find one. There's one. I'm storing like way too much on GitHub. I need to clear all that up. I thought I had unlimited storage. I hit my threshold. Now they're telling me I need to pay them money. It's a bummer. And that pier is a pretty big image. How big is that? Reveal in Finder, 3.5 megabytes. Oh well. We will drop it in right there. Maybe I could go find a really small picture. Let's go find a really small picture. And we'll look for dog. And images. I guess, you know, we can maybe just use my dog. How big is that file? Tools. Well, here, this is a usage rights, labeled for reviews. And that's a sweet puppy. Save image as. I'm going to save that to documents, HTML, CSS, temp, basics, and we'll call it dog. And it's a JPEG. So now I could, if I wanted to, insert an image and go up and then put in dog. And alternative text display if the image doesn't show up. So that's what that is. And I could drop an image in. Come on. Why are you hesitating? Close that. Let's try this again. There we go. And there's my dog. All right, so nice. I get to start putting a dog in. You know, and I could have images, headings, paragraphs, text, and it all renders out, and it's really nice. Did I do a little demonstration for you about creating a web page on the first day or the first week? So if I wanted to create a website, you know, here is that peer one. I'm just going to drop a new folder in there and call it Flexbox. I don't have to do a new file. But I think the first thing I'll show you before I show you that is CSS. And so when you build web pages, HTML is for the structure. And this is what we're looking at. It structures your content. HTML structures your content. So the content's the text, the images, and that all gets structured top to bottom. So in programming, we talk about a concept called control flow. And it seems like it helps when I write stuff down for y'all. That clues you in that, oh, this is important. So HTML structures content. Doesn't it feel more serious when I write it down? Like, oh, we're in a class, we're actually learning something. He must be a real teacher. He's writing on the whiteboard. And it structures content. I don't know what else I was just going to say. I went on a tangent. I lost it. What was I saying? HTML structures content. And then there's this concept, and I can't put this under HTML. I need to put it over here. There's this concept of separation of concerns. Okay? And so in separation of concerns, the history of programming, and we'll learn more about programming in another week, but the history of programming is a history that goes from, like, you know, things are not well organized to becoming better organized. And so code used to be written in one file. It used to just be a big page of code, and it had a bunch of go-to statements. When I first took a programming class, and then I promptly quit, I wish I hadn't. In 1982, it was a basic programming class. That's the name of the language, BASIC. And it had all these go-to statements. And so you would be like, it'd have line numbers, and you'd say, go to line 40, and then start executing. And then you'd have an arrow to go to this place and go to that place. There's one big page of code, but it's super convoluted to try to figure out what was doing what with all these go-to statements. And so that was called spaghetti code. Following a thread of logic was like following a noodle in a bowl of spaghetti. Where did that noodle go amidst all the other noodles is hard to trace. And so then people started to structure their code more, and structured programming, breaking it up into modules. And so you'd have one module here to do something, one module here to do something. And that was known as structured or procedural programming, breaking things into structure or procedures. And so related to this is this idea of separation of concerns, breaking things apart into different pieces. What is the concern of HTML? Do I sound like a teacher? Right? Isn't that funny how people like talk a certain talk? Right? Like now I'm in lecture. Now I'm not in lecture mode. I no longer sound like a teacher, right? I'm just talking a little bit. But if I was a preacher, I'd have a different sound. Or if I was a news anchor, well, I'm glad you asked about that because I'm here at the front of the classroom and I want to tell you about HTML, and there's something very interesting happening here. You know, they've got like a higher tone. No? Have you noticed that?
Yes.
Isn't that weird? You know how Oprah became Oprah? Kannada. She was a news anchor person. She was just starting out. She'd been doing it a couple of months, and she was doing the role where she pretended she was reading the news and in other news, and then she said, and then we also had something happen up in Kannada. And then she stopped and she laughed and she said, that's Canada. And then she realized she was just like playing a role and that she just broke the role. And then she realized, I don't want to do news. I want to like be real and talk to people. And so she started a talk show. Kannada. And then she became one of the most influential, wealthy women in the history of humanity because of Kannada. Isn't that awesome? All right, I don't know what the hell I was talking about. Separation of concerns. right? We break things into different parts. Things have different responsibilities. So the HTML's job is to structure the content. And this is the holy trinity of web programming. The CSS job is to format. And CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And then JavaScript's job is functionality. And if you've ever heard of the programming language Java, JavaScript and Java are about as different as, I don't know, day and night. Right? There's totally two different languages. They just happen to share Java and COM in the name, but they're completely different languages. So that's the holy trinity of web programming, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or building front-end web pages. So separation of concerns. Right? HTML structures the content. That's HTML's concern. CSS formats the content. CSS concern is about formatting. And JavaScript is about functionality, like making it do something. Does your password have the right length and the right weird characters in it? Do your two emails that you entered match each other? Right? Enter it again. Do they match? No. They don't even have to send the data to the server, just checking it on your machine. And so we use CSS for formatting. So I create a little CSS style sheet. We'll call it main, split it vertically, and then come in here and I could link this to my HTML page. So first I'm just going to put in some standard boilerplate for creating an HTML page. This just says that this document is an HTML document. The language is English, telling the browsers that read it, hey, this is written in the English language, what we're presenting here. And the encoding scheme is UTF-8. So everything has an encoding scheme. Encoding schemes used to be a challenging thing back in the day because different languages use different encoding schemes. And even the same languages could use different encoding schemes. So if you're in Japan, you might have software that's using one encoding scheme, and you send it to somebody else, and their computer's using a different encoding scheme, and they couldn't read it because these zeros and ones meant, konnichiwa on the first system, and those zeros and ones on the second system meant nothing, because they're different encoding schemes. But UTF-8 has unified the encoding schemes, and computers are powerful enough to deal with a 32-bit encoding scheme that everybody in the world uses UTF-8 now.
What does that stand for? UTF?
I don't know. I'm thinking Universal Text Format, but that was just a guess. UTF-8 Wiki. Character encoding, UTF-8, backward compatibility, Ken Thompson or Rob Pike. Description, I don't know what UTF-8 stands for. Unicode code point, Unicode text format maybe. I don't know. Let's just do UTF-8, UTF Wiki. UTF Wiki. May refer to UTF-1, none of that stuff. I don't know. I don't know. That's a great question. So now I could paste in all that code I had before. There's my HTML document, still my HTML document. And now I could link to it my CSS. So I said, hey, go get this CSS over here. And we're going to use that to format this HTML. And the way we do the formatting, and if you wanted to learn more about creating web pages, this is a pretty good resource. I say it's pretty good because it's about 1.5 years, 2 years old. And when you get to layout, positioning content, and he starts talking about float, you just want to skip that. There's a new way to position stuff. All right? And so here, building your first web page, he has a nice little graphic down here. And he talks about everything that I'm showing you here. This is a free book. Shay is an acquaintance of mine. He's a good guy. He's in Chicago. But here, this is how we do our CSS. There's going to be a selector. So this is called a rule set. A rule set. It's a set of rules. And it's going to have a selector, which will select something over here, and then it'll apply some rules or declarations to it. So a rule set has a declaration block, between code curly braces, that's a block of code. And then we have declarations. And a declaration is a property and a value. A property and a value. So this is all called a rule set. And what's that look like in action? I can say, hey, I want to format all my H1. There's my selector. There's my code block, my declaration block. Now I need declarations. Declarations are in a property value kind of setup. I want the color, which is how you change the font color, to be red. Right? So there's the property, is the color, and the value I'm giving it is red. Now when I refresh Shea House page, nothing changes. But when I refresh this, those turn to red. Sweet! Right? And so that's how you apply CSS. And so if you wanted to add JavaScript to that, you could also create O3, a JavaScript file. So I could do new main JavaScript file, and then on my HTML, and I could do alert. JavaScript always wants a semicolon at the end of it. And then we could come down to the end and we could do a script tag, and we could add an attribute to that tag for source, and we could say we want to run that JavaScript code. So now when I run this page, pops up this alert. And that's JavaScript, hello world. Interesting, right? Kind of cool. Close all. And then if you wanted to create something, the way that you position stuff today is with Flexbox, something called Flexbox. And so I'm going to do a new main style sheet and then split that vertically so I have my styling on the right and my code HTML on the left. And then link my style sheet. And then I could put in some text, and I'll make that an H1. And then over here, I'll have my HTML, my body, and my H1. And I'm going to just kind of reset things a little bit. So there's content, there's padding around that content, there's a border, and there's a margin. So I'm going to do the padding and set that to 0, and the border, and set that to 0, and the margin, and set that to 0. And the point isn't for you to understand all this. It's just to demonstrate kind of how you build a website. And so for my body, I'm going to make this, I'll make the height of my body the entire height of the viewport, and then I'll do display flex and justify content center and align items center. And that's going to put Paradise in the middle of the page. And then the next thing that I want to do is background. And the background image that I want is this pier. Right there. And I want background position to be centered. And I want background position size to be to cover the page. And I want background size, position, color, repeat to be no repeat. And I want background position, color, image, attachment, blend mode, clip, origin, position. That's plenty. And now I have an image back there, and I want my H1 to be color white, and I want the size, font size, to be like 12 rem. And then when I look at this, and it's like cool. And then if I wanted to create a little bit of a header up top, right, I would actually probably put this in like main, which means that here this is all going to be applied to main. And then here I would have a header. And for my header, I would say that this is position fixed to the top and to the left, and the width is 100%, and the height is like 8 viewport height, and the background color is like, we'll go with the light blue, and then I'm going to change that and give it a little bit of opacity and choose so you can see through it. And then I want a border bottom, and that bottom border I like just like a nice gray, dark slate gray. Border bottom, 2 pixels, solid dark slate gray. And let's see what that's looking like. And so it's a little bit, too big for me, maybe a 6. Right, but then that's where that dark line's a little bit too dark. All right, but now that's where I could put like my image over on the left of the logo, and then the links over on the right. And I could put some stuff down here so that when I scroll, this image scrolls up out of the way and like content beneath the fold, but that header always stays in place, right? As I scroll through the page, I always got those links up there at the top. So that's like, wow, once you get those skills, you could kind of create simple little web pages for people. And then you're like, well, I want to put that stuff in the top left and the right. All right, cool. So we come up into the header area, and we're going to have 2 divs. And the divs that are children of the header, right, will have certain qualities. And we'll do their width at like 200 pixels. And their height at 100% of their parent, and we'll do a border of 1 pixel solid black, and a background color just so we could see them of red, and then we'll do a header up here. We want to distribute where those are, because we look at it right now, they're just right there, and that's not looking the way we want it to look, right? And so to do that, we'll do a little layout. And the layout on that will be, again, display flex. And then justify content operates on the primary axis, which is row by default. I'm just speaking out loud. And we'll do space between, space around. We want space between. Now we could put stuff into each of these areas here. Like we could put our company logo, and then over here we could put contact about, I don't know what else is up there, log out, and we're like, well, we want that to be in the center, and we want that to be in the center of each of those areas. So we'd create another one. We say, hey, inside the header there are divs, oh well, we already have that one. And so here we want to do the layout inside there. And so we do display flex on that, and we do justify content. Oh, no, we want center. Center. And we do align items. Center. And now that text and logo and everything be in the center. And so that red here, maybe only make this 80%. I don't know if it needs to be 100%. And then for the header, we want the line items, because that will operate on the cross axis to center that. And then that all looks pretty good, right? Like those are the containers, those divs. And so when we no longer need to see those divs because we've done our layout, and then here we could just do our color on everything as white. So we'll just kind of do that up here. Or we could be specific and say that these divs inside that header, we want the color to be white. And then the font size to maybe be 2 rem or 1 rem, 1.4. And then the width on these divs, let's not make that constrained. And we will do on those divs a little bit of a margin, and top and bottom and right left we'll do 20 pixels. Bring it in a little bit. And then we're like, cool, that's looking pretty good. And then for any div that is inside a header, when you hover over it, let's change the color to blue. Right, so now, but it's all of that, because those are each in a div, right? That's all in one div. So this looks fine when that happens, but I want each of those to happen individually, correct? And so inside here, I could maybe do like 3 spans. And I could have contact, about, and log out. Oop, I lost my div. And put this in a span. And now I'm going to say only when a span is hovered do I want that. I lost my space, right? But now they're each independently happening. That's nice. And so what I want to do on my spans is just put a little bit of a margin around them. So now I've got some space, and they're each kind of individually happening. So I share that just to kind of give you a sense, a feel of what it's like to program and build stuff. And there's also just like a fair amount of time trying and experimenting with stuff and reading something and then trying it and building it in. And then you do something enough and it becomes a language you speak. Does that interest anybody? So that's the Holy Trinity, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And we have separation of concerns. And we also have control flow, right? So control flow. So this is another concept which we'll learn about again some when we talk about programming. And so the way the computer reads code is top to bottom. It's called sequence. It reads it in sequence. And that control flow could also have, so it's sequential, and then it's also iterative, and it's also conditional. And so iterative is like a loop, right? Just keeps doing it, doing it, doing it, doing it, doing it until some condition is met. And a conditional is like, hey, we came to some fork in the road. If the score is 90 or above, send a congratulatory message. If it's less than 70, send a request for a meeting so I could talk with you, So that's conditional. So that's control flow. And over here, right, this code is being read top to bottom. So here I said that, the header should be blue when the span should be blue when I hover over it. And what happens if down here I say they should be green, right? Well, now I have 2 conflicting statements to the computer. I've told it to make the text blue when I hover it, and then I told it down here to make it green. It's going to be green because the last thing I told it was make it green, right? That's green. See that? So, it read this and said, okay, and then it came down here and it read that and it said, okay, and it overrode what it read up here. So that's sequential control flow. Have you learned something tonight? Yeah. Has it been worth your time? Or you don't care? care about this stuff? You do. Cool. So if this interests you, we teach a class in this. I actually teach this class, creating websites. And everything you saw me do right here, by week 10 in the semester, you're doing this. All right, you learn how to do this. So that's pretty cool. Like in 10 weeks, you could be doing that. If you do all the assignments, do the work. And then if you keep it up for like 2 years, you know, you could, you know, your skills get good enough, you could go to some place like Hack Reactor, or, you know, you just get good and then you could go get a job and you know, so you apply. Hack Reactor is a place where you apply and then they train you and they place you in a job, and the average graduate from Hack Reactor, which is like a 6-month program where you just code every day, makes $105,000 a year. And so that pathway would be like, I'm going to study HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Go while I'm here at Fresno City College. And then in a year, I'll apply to Hack Reactor. And if I get into Hack Reactor, that'll cost me $30,000. But I have, if I do well in the program, right, 81% of job attainers reported salaries, right? So out of their 100% of people who got jobs, 81% reported their salaries, and these were the reported salaries. And the blue is software engineer median salary and Hack Reactor median starting salary. And so 81% of people who graduate from this were making $105,000 a year when they graduated. That's kind of cool. Of course, you're going to pay about $3,000 a month in rent in San Francisco. Unless you want hot water, then there'll be more. So when we build web pages, we talk about the front end and the back end. And so the front end is everything that you just saw. Okay? So that's all this: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's the front end. Like, what do the people look at when they use the website? And then we have the back end. And the back end is going to have some sort of programming. So, you know, the back end is going to be like server. They call it server side also, right? Server side. And it'll have some sort of programming language, so server side functionality. And that will be like Go is the best choice today. And then behind that would probably be Node and maybe Python. And this is like an order of preference. And then Ruby, and then behind that, like PHP. All right? Those are like order preference, with Go being the first choice for a server side. And then this language here will be able to connect to some sort of data storage. And for data, we have both SQL and NoSQL data storage. So you don't have to know what that means, but I'm just planting the seed in case you ever learn more about it. You got it in your notes. Like, that's a really good little graphic right there. Server-side Go, Node, Python, Ruby, PHP, and then it connects to a database, and the database could be like a SQL server or NoSQL server. And there was recently pretty big news in nobody loves Trump. Even though it's like a good message, like nobody's like touching that. Love and fortitude to all in Seoul and South Korea. North Korea conflict impact. This is a great video. We'll watch it here in a moment just to take a break from hearing me. Let me just pause it. Pause.
No.
So there's big news in the Go community recently. And the creator of Nodejs, which was this other option, right? He created it, and he said, all right, that's not so good. I'm going to switch to Go, like the dude who created Node. And like, imagine if you're a company who's like, okay, we just built this system, and you invested millions of dollars and built it in Node, and then the guy who built Node said, it's not as good as Go, I'm switching. You'd be like, oh, that's too bad. We also teach Node here at City College. So that's just a little introduction to creating websites. And what we're going to do now is stop this video and we're going to watch a video.